So here at the University of Sheffield, we've been looking at the history of plastics and its involvement in the development of UK food retailing. Plastic packaging has a lot of benefits, including its marketing and communicative effects. So we want to understand how and why we've come to use plastic the way we have, but also to consider its use in the wider context of food retailing. Sometimes plastic packaging has its benefits. It communicates and it displays brands, logos, but also information. But it also provides an airtight, a gas-tight and watertight barrier for products inside, but also to the outside atmosphere. So using the Marks and Spencer's company archive, we look through history primarily from the 1950s onwards to understand why and how plastic packaging has evolved alongside food. The first example that we looked at was cake packaging. So back in the 1950s, a lot of products were sold unwrapped and sort of cut for the customer or given in any number of denomination to the customer. So biscuits and cakes could have been asked by a customer for how much they wanted or how much weight they wanted. And then the retailer or the supervisor or the assistant, shop assistant, would cut the cake or count the biscuits and give to the customer. But throughout the 1950s, Marks and Spencer's asked its suppliers and manufacturers to pre-wrap all its cakes and biscuits. Now this was a time when food retailing, shops and supermarkets were developing massively and rapidly. So before this time, generally, a lot of shops were single product shops, such as your greengrocer or your butcher or your fishmonger, whereas M&S started to bring these products together in one store. Now this all came through from the US of A and their use of the self-service or supermarkets, where customers would go around the shop picking the products that they wanted themselves, rather than going up to the shop assistant behind a counter and asking for particular products for a particular weight or particular cost. So wrapping the product as soon as it was made in the factory meant that the product was more hygienically clean, but also prevented contamination from microorganisms. During this time, the whole manufacturing supply chain was developing, worker hygiene was improving, manufacturing hygiene was improving, and plastic packaging enabled that next step of keeping the product clean. And it also communicated to the customer that their product was clean and fresh. So during this period, and especially in 1954, when food rationing was ended, a lot of food materials were getting better in quality. So things like eggs, flour, butter and fats were improving. And so with this, the packaging needed to improve to keep the product clean and safe. And this is what plastic packaging did. So development of packaging that could be heat sealed was a major step forward in protecting products that we take for granted today. And what this meant was it enabled better quality foods and it enabled freshness for the customer. Today, many of us use food that's ready to use, ready to heat and ready to eat. A lot of the time we refer to this as convenience food. Now we might consider this might be takeaways or ready meals, but a lot of food that we eat today is known to be convenient. Things like our lunchtime sandwich that's pre-prepared in the store, ready for us to eat at lunchtime. There's also things such as baby food in squeezable pouches that's been pre-prepared, ready to consume. And also things like salmon in the fresh aisle that's been cut and pre-packed. You can consider that as convenient and ready to use, and only needing yourself to cook it when you get home. So plastic packaging has reacted to and supported changes in social life. Back in the 1950s, there was an idea of the traditional household. Now today, there are a lot more single parents with children. Women continue work after marriage, but also our habits and our experiences of travelling has changed, with us flying to a lot more exotic countries that we may not have been to before. Plastic pouch is an example that brings all of these things together. So today we might know this to be sort of the rice pouches, or what I have here, sort of prepared sauces that are sort of flexible and made out of plastic. In the 1970s, this was a new technology. This plastic packaging allowed higher processing temperatures and quicker sterilisation through rapid heat penetration because of the thin wall of the plastic material. But what does this mean? Well, before then, a lot of our food was stored in tin cans. Now, tin cans couldn't store delicate flavours or textures because it needed a high temperature and a long time to sterilise the product inside. So by the time that the food was clean and hygienically clean, a lot of the flavours would have been destroyed. At the time, none of Marks & Spencer's canned products included fresh cream or herbs or wine because of this damaging process. But with the retortable packaging, these flavours could be preserved. So things like beef stroganoff, chunky chicken, cannelloni, these new and exotic foods that were only ever experienced abroad and on holiday were now easily made in the home. These plastic pouches were also convenient because there was no mess, no smell, reduced cooking time, but also there was less washing up after finishing your food. The final example that we looked at was fresh meat. So a key factor in selling fresh meat is that it needs to be kept under controllable conditions to prevent bacteria growth. Today we refer to this as the cold chain technique in refrigeration, from manufacturing through transit to the store, and then when buying, getting it home and putting it in the fridge or freezer, keeping the product refrigerated, which means that there's a longer shelf life of the product, but also the product didn't have to be sold on the day, and also distribution of the food can be much further in the UK from where it was manufactured. But what we also found out was the need for plastic packaging in the cold chain technique. So plastic packaging provided a gas impermeable barrier, which meant that no gas from the outside could get into the product. So throughout the 1980s, the use of gas in packaging was being explored. Now, certain gases provided certain benefits. So oxygen maintained the bright colour of red meat, which customers long associated with a sign of freshness, whereas carbon dioxide prevented bacterial growth, which meant that the shelf life of the product could be extended more days, giving more time to sell the product, but also to be consumed in the house for longer. So the mixture of the gases of carbon dioxide and oxygen, along with the air impermeable barrier of plastic packaging, meant that the natural colour of the meat was retained for longer, and the shelf life of the product was extended for 2 to 3 days, which at the time was critical. Controlled atmosphere packaging then improved food safety, food hygiene and sanitation of the product, and it also extended the biological life of our food and the quality. This example also situates plastic packaging alongside other technologies such as refrigeration in getting our food from the farm to our plate at home. So by highlighting plastic packaging's role in the history of food retailing, it helps us understand the services it provides our food. And going forward, it helps us understand what functions we want to keep, whilst also tackling the issue of plastic packaging waste. So something that we're doing here at the University of Sheffield is looking at reusable packaging and understanding how we can keep these certain functions that protects our food, keeps our food clean and fresh, but also how we can use that packaging over and over again, reducing the environmental damage.